That's so important. Yes.
We didn't even check because clearly you're a safe person.
One, two, three, 5.
All the speakers spot ready? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to the last Engineering Education Research Seminar of the fall 2015 semester. It's been a great semester. We've got great talks. And before I introduce the final set of talks today, I want to remind you that we will have a seminar series in the spring, same time, Thursdays at 3:30. And we'll actually be back downstairs again in B071. So, yeah, this was the room we got for this fall semester. It seems to have worked out okay. And so, yeah, we start right again right at the beginning of the classes begin, and we actually have a lot more speakers. So please come next semester as well. Are there other announcements here from Graduate Student Association, ASEE Student Chapter? Yes?
Nicole will finish what I can. The ENE cookie exchange, tell us more.
Yeah.
The ENE holiday parties tomorrow starting at 4. Well, we'll be there from 4, and we actually start officially at 5. There's a stone soup. I will send out an email with stone soup, and there's cookie exchange, and if you need more information, I'll be happy to talk about it.
So tomorrow afternoon, if you want to participate in Stone Soup, come a little early and throw your things into the
focus on is the cookie exchange.
And the cookie exchange is at 4. Right, so that's the important thing. So very good. Other announcements. So that's tomorrow at the Wang Commons space.
Yes, in the kitchen area.
Kitchen area. Very good. Other announcements. I don't have the name of the snack bringer. Who brought snacks today?
Monica and myself.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Monica. As usual, I have attendance sheet, so if you want to sign in, make sure that you get credit for being here. And even if you're not registered for the course, so we know where people are coming from, and if you are not already there, if you're from another department, you're certainly welcome, and you can add yourself to the sheet with your email address so you can receive announcements of future seminars. Today's talk is going to be Boilercast, so if you're not here, you can see the recording of it later. So I'll let Steve tell us about the ENE 2015 Explorers. First year students.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming and welcome to the presentations. Before they start, I'd like to take a few minutes to just describe the Explorers program for those who don't know and what we do and how it all works. This is the third year of the program. If you're looking around the room, there are 5 past Explorers So the third year of the program, we've had about 25 people now who have done it. The 7 students who will present today and then the 8 who are out of the country we're all in their first semester at the ENE graduate program. In order to allow students time to acclimate before they get here, also to figure out their best research group and the best research advisor to do, the department supports them on the Explorer Fellowship for the first, for most of them, for the first semester. And then as part of that, in addition to just, their classwork and getting, their fellowship money and everything, they work with me on various projects related to first-year engineering. And some of the questions that we have. So these are things often that I want to know about first-year engineering, but I don't have the time or space or energy to figure out. At least that's where they start. But it is a great win-win situation. It gives the new students a chance to see what engineering education research is like, and gets them a chance to get their feet wet in a relatively low-stress way, because this is a one-semester commitment that isn't necessarily going to become their dissertation. It gives first-year engineering some answers and some insights or questions that we want to know and that we don't have answers to. It gives the students a chance, the explorers a chance to learn about ENE, learn about the structure of the university, and learn about how things work, because they actually spend a lot of time in our weekly meetings talking about how first-year engineering works. And most importantly, it gives them a chance to see the messiness of research. So often, people are smiling now. Coming in thinking that it gives them a chance to see what some of the problems are going to be before they get into their main projects. I just want to give you an idea of the scope of the semester to sort of remind you as you look at these projects. These are 13-week projects. We started these 13 weeks ago. We were at square one on all of those. I did not have the projects selected and pre-vetted and ready to go and ready to plop out. We spent actually most of September scoping the project. So in the first couple of meetings, I presented, 10, 12-ish ideas of things that we have, and I don't think we ended up using one of them. And the other two sort of morphed into different ways. There was negotiation back and forth, figuring out what interests were. We had to spend some time figuring out what the teams were going to be. So most of September was that scoping and scaling what the research questions are going to be. October then became, and especially people last year remember this, but October became IRB month. And only one of the 3 teams this year had to do IRB. The other 2 were not working with students and student data. But IRB month can be a challenge. The students do their own IRB application. They go to the IRB and deal with them themselves. I help out as I can, but it's really the experience for them to negotiate through all the revisions and get everything ready to go so that they can eventually then, in November, collect data. And now we're in December, right? So it is a tight time scale. So that's my caveat. These projects are still in progress. They are not final projects, although you'll see actually some really good work that they've done. All 3 of the teams have submitted and had their abstracts accepted to ASEE in June, so that may actually be more of an end point, finishing point for these. The same as last year, actually, all 3 projects from the Explorers last year also went and presented to ASEE. I'm really proud about that. The plan for today is to give each of the groups about 10 minutes to talk, and then there'll be a little bit of time for questions. I will ask you in the first question time, immediately following each talk, to limit to just questions that are quick and clarification sort of things. After we get then through all 3 teams, there'll be a little bit of an opportunity for them to offer some reflections on the process, reflections of what they've learned in research, and then hopefully we'll still have 10 to 15 minutes-ish to ask more detailed questions. The presentations show a wide variety of the unit of analysis of engineering education research, and they'll be ordered today from sort of the small to the large. So starting with the first one, investigating students and teams and their experiences, so very much at the student scale. Second presentation to look more at the course scale. It's one about history of engineering 131 and looking at how that has evolved through the last 5 years. And then the third one is then at the bigger scale, the program level scale. So it's an ABET assessment accreditation and definitions of certain outcomes. I've talked enough, so I will go ahead then and pass it on to the first team that's going, team, because they're working on team stuff. So Chanel, Beebe, and Hoda Ehsan are presenting. Roshu was also on this project, but she's in China, so she's not Skyping in today in the middle of the night. So I'll pass on to Chanel and Hoda.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so as Steve said, we are Chanel and Hoda. And we work on the team. We are a team. So I'm sure that every one of us has had experiences of working in teams. I want you to imagine that you are in a different country with different language and culture, and you are supposed to work in teams. And also, I want you to imagine that you are in your country, but you are supposed to work in a team that members have these stereotypes about your color, your culture, and your background. What would those experiences look like? This is what we try to study in our team. experiences of international and underrepresented students in teams.
So before we get into our research and our data, we're going to present to you the research that supports and kind of motivates our interest in this area. So a study done by IIE this year said that the presence of international students in universities across our country has increased by 10%. This takes us to a record high of just under 1 million international students in universities across our country. In addition, a study of first-year students in the European Union found that international students reported having a low both social and academic self-confidence after their team experience. In addition, as it relates to underrepresented students, a study done by Dingle and Way in 2014 found that race affects group leadership, that white students are more likely to take leadership roles and get higher grades than their counterparts of color. They also found a racial bias in peer evaluation, which meant that members of color were getting lower grades in these classes. At Purdue specifically, in 2014, there was a study that measured the amount of conflict, interdependence, and cohesion in these groups and found that there were varying levels of satisfaction in these teams for international students and domestic students. Even more specifically, it found that international students were underperforming their domestic counterparts. Another study found that international students have a different experience with team dynamics. All this is to say that team dynamics are a very important part of the first-year engineering process, and that international students and underrepresented students are experiencing these in kind of weird ways. This motivated our research question, which is, what are factors that are influencing these team experiences for international and underrepresented students?
Okay, since having in-depth knowledge of group dynamics is essential to understand group structures and members' experiences in team, we studied group dynamics. What is group dynamics? It refers to the forces related to interactions of members, which affect members' behavior as individuals and as them as a team. We use this framework developed by Tosland and Rivas 2005. It is based on understanding a group, a team, social system. It has 4 dimensions, which we expect that many of factors related to these 4 dimensions can influence students' experiences in teams in overall. The first one, communication, is the system of receiving and sending and receiving messages. It can be verbal, it can be written or computer-based, which is one of the most preferable ways of communication for international students, and it can be non-verbal, which it is important to be studied for minorities and students from some countries. Some interferences can happen in this process, and it can be a difference between international students to underrepresented students to other students, and this is because of their different cultures, background, values, assumption, language barrier, and so on. Cohesion is the second dimension, which refers to the attraction of groups that make the members to stay in that group. In other words, is having the sense of belonging to the group. We believe and we expect that many factors related to cohesion influence international and underrepresented students' experiences. Social integration is related to members' relationships. In other words, is how members are accepted in groups. And also here we believe that international students and underrepresented students have some difficulties to be accepted in groups, or vice versa, to accept others in their groups. And the last one, group culture. We all know what culture is and means, but group culture is actually a combination of cultures in one group. For example, a diverse group may have, in diverse groups, group culture will emerge slowly, and this will cause some difficulties for members in overall. So, based on those 4 dimensions, and by carefully studying the factors related to those dimensions, we developed our survey. The goal of our survey was to understand which of these dimensions had the most impact and influence on students' experiences in overall. I'm sorry. This happens. And then we went through our idea of course, which It takes us more than we expected.
A lot more.
A lot more. And then we went to this engineering 132 class, which we assumed that almost all of the students have already taken 131 class and have these experiences. As an optional question, we asked them to provide us information about their demographics in the survey, and we are hoping to have a focus group based on the result on our survey. We didn't have it. And this is the result of survey.
So as you can see, we were able to get 11 Asian students to fill out the survey. We got 4 African American students and 12 Caucasian students, and 1 that identified themselves as other. Unfortunately, we did not think to make the demographic question include domestic or international, so we have no way of knowing which of these students are domestic or international. Things you learn. So hopefully in our focus group we'll be able to kind of figure out the differences to let students self-report their domestic or international status. The first question in our survey asks about their overall experience working in teams, working in their group in Engineering 131, really to kind of jar their memories of being in that class. As you can see, we got a wide range of what that experience was like. Some people called it a 3 on a scale of 10, which is more than failing. Other people called it a 10 out of 10, which means it was excellent. So obviously there's some difference in these experiences. The average was about 7.5. You can see from these comments that it ranges a lot. One really interesting finding that was pointed out as relates to these comments was that our Caucasian students tended to write more than our international and underrepresented students, which is not the point of our survey, but if you'd like to study that. We got a total of 33 responses. I think we got 1 more, so maybe 34, but they're not included in this. So our results, as it relates to communication and interaction patterns, you can see that for the most part, this was moderately influential for the students, with the mean of being very close to 3.5. Same for group cohesion, we got closer to very influential. So the scale that they had to choose from was from not influential at all to extremely. So you can see group cohesion being a little bit more important. Social integration was moderately, so with an average of about 3. And group culture had an average of about 3 as well, somewhere between slightly influential and moderately influential. All these graphs have been plotted on this one graph here, and as you can see, the average says that group cohesion and communication are the most influential for these students. One caveat for our sample of 4 African American underrepresented students, we found a difference in that they found group cohesion and social integration to be the most important. So it's a sample of 4, so we can't say definitively that all underrepresented students feel that way, but we do know that there's a difference in what is most important. And this is the motivation behind our focus group. So now we design focus group questions that specifically get at these 2 areas to say, okay, what about group cohesion was so difficult for you? What was it that really changed your experience? Not necessarily difficult, but we'll come up with questions around these 2 areas.
So as the next step, we are hoping to have a focus group early on next semester to work on cohesion, as Shannon also said, to work on cohesion and communication. We will use thematic analysis to analyze our data from focus group, and finally we will have our result of focus group. And our abstract has been submitted and accepted in ASEE. However, since we don't have our focus group yet, we are thinking about submitting it to FIE. And special thanks to Steve, Isabel, Dr. Olden, Madeleine, and our cohorts and the ENE family.
Just a clarification question or 2 before we move on to the next group.
So 2 quick questions. In the survey, did you define what each of these dimensions is for the students?
Yes.
Yeah.
Second, how many items did you have for each dimension?
We defined it, we had the definition, and also we had some examples as positive and negative
No, I mean, did they respond to one? There's 1 question per dimension?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need.
Robin,
Oh, I was just going to say, based on what you are discovering, what do you want to do in the focus group?
I think in our focus group we want to flesh out what they think these dimensions mean first, just so we know we're talking about the right things. And then flesh out how those, when they called it influential, what did it influence? So was it the way you wrote, was it the way you felt, was it the way you thought? So pretty much just figure out what these data points mean to the students.
So did you think about doing the focus groups from the very beginning, or during the study you thought that it would be useful to do focus groups?
No, it was from the beginning.
So you already have IRB approval for doing focus
Yes.
groups?
Have you thought about how the dynamic of your team is domestic and international?
It's been hilarious.
And
It's been a hilarious little irony bubble of international and underrepresented students trying to understand and communicate and work in a group to figure out what that experience can be like. I think we learned a lot. So I love that.
Did your IRB permit you to keep track of who these students are that you have data from?
I don't understand the question. Say it again.
Are they identified?
Or they identified?
Oh, no. The only identifiable information we have is at the end. If they're interested in the focus group, they gave us their email address. So.
I mean, I asked that because we certainly do know the nationality of people in the class, but if you can't connect it, then...
No.
We thought about that. Steve said no.
Well, Steve didn't say no. Steve said that would be impossible.
Yeah. Or in the time frame to get the IRB approval. Let's make it easy. Okay, let's move on to the second group. We'll have more time for deeper questions if we want to later. So the second group is David Eatonhouse, Dinesh Radhakrishnan, and Tony Lowe talking about Engineering 131, history of it, and a documentary or an artifact analysis of what the class is in.
Yes, so we can't report that any students didn't like the class. We didn't talk to students at all. Our job is to go through the SharePoint of the last 5 years or so and just look at the artifacts that were out there. Just trying to get a feel for what's changed over the year. We're not making a judgment on what's being taught or where it should be going. We're just trying to track some numbers and look at basically an artifact review, trying to code out and see trends that are out there. And we're trying to expand that a little bit further within our research as well. So the first research question within this is just simply to just understand the design of 131. So what are the things that are out there? What are the ways students see this information? What are they asked to do through a series of measures that we've done? And then we're trying to generalize that process into how can we look at any large multi-format class? So you have classes where thousands of students take the class. You have students with classes where 5 or 6 or 10 teachers might be contributing, and that rotates over time. So how do they know what's been done before? How do they know what are the metrics to make a choice where they're going to go next? And so the other side of this, as I said, is for us to understand the idea of an artifact review. So what are the work that we have to do to code data? What are the trends that we're going to look for? How do we analyze that? And then how do we validate what we're seeing in artifacts really means something in the real world? How do we come back around and make sure we're not just lost in the data or some representation that didn't actually happen?
So that seems to be a well-stated purpose and for the research that we have to do. So the next step as a involving researcher for us to do is to take the necessary planning and also the steps to be done to fulfill that purpose. So we plan the whole segment in 3 steps. And the first step is to look at the artifacts. Here the artifacts means 2 specific things. One is the course syllabus from 2010 to 2014 of each year of 131 semesters. And then looking at the course syllabus, what are the course objectives and what are the grade weightages and what are the roles and responsibilities of each person who is associated with the teaching of the classes. And the second one is to look at the homework and exams specific to each and every week on the problems that have been given to the students and they take it. And once we collected these artifacts, we started coding them on the themes that we have identified, which will be presented, and to do the data analysis for that. And the next step, which is also still ongoing, is the contributor feedback to validate the information, to get first a clear impression about what the people who are associated with 131 thinks about the course, and also to validate the coding that we have done and understand where we are standing on that. And the third step, which is at the last we would be doing, as Tony just mentioned, we are not looking at the quality of each and every homework and exams or what it contains, but just understanding the change that it has gone through. We pretty much assume and also believe that 131 is an awesome course that students take. So we are just looking at the evolution of the course which is going on.
So what we mean specifically by a top-level analysis is that this is data that originated from documents that have to do with the planning, development, or the large-scale execution of the course. So this was looking at syllabi, course planning documents, those things that we were able to access on SharePoint. So some of the areas that we looked at here were the learning objectives of the course, the grading scale, and the grade weighting, as well as the resources that were available to the students, such as programs like MATLAB or Excel, and as well as textbooks, learning modules, etc. And then the roles of the instructor, the TA, and the grader, how those might have changed over the course of the years, and finally other interesting tidbits that we might have come across. So an example of what might arise from this type of data is a mapping of the learning objectives to a Bloom's revised taxonomy as proposed by Anderson and Kraftwall. Now, I want to just explain this image for a moment because we're going to go into a depiction of how it changed over the course of time next. At the bottom, you can see the levels of learning as originally proposed by Bloom, and then on the right, you can see the different levels of cognitive complexity. And each of these areas represents a different mapping that we possibly could have done, and the height of the column indicates how many of the learning objectives fall into that specific mapping. So, as you can see over the course of time, we slowly moved to an area that had fewer learning objectives that were in a higher cognitive load and a higher level of learning. Now, an example of what might have been coded here, being able to describe the various different disciplines that are offered at Purdue would be remembering and factual, whereas examining career information from the field or information from the discipline in order to decide on what discipline to go into would be analyzing and factual. Another example of what might have arisen from this data is an analysis of the grade weighting. Specifically, I found the exams interesting because we started off with 40%, and then we added 5 percentage points and took away 5 percentage points the very next year. I'm not sure why that happened, but I thought it was interesting. Moving on.
So the other themes that we looked at, the second level of this artifact, which is the homework and exam problems, week by week, that was there in the SharePoint folder. So these are the themes that we looked at to code the particular problems. So the first couple of them are very straightforward. The third one describes about what technology we had to use to solve the particular assignment, whether we have to use Excel or MATLAB or some problems, in some cases, which is both. And the next one is the technical skills versus professional skills, which is here when we call technical skills, it's mostly whenever they relate something to an engineering topic and use a technology into it, such as design process or like model eliciting activities, versus professional skills is mostly reflecting on experiences of teamwork and reflecting on their own personal experiences of how they are going with the course. And the next set of coding that we did was for writing and engineering assignments. So the writing part and the engineering part, we divided it into 5 different themes, but then starting from writing alone, which comprises of similar things like reflecting on their experiences and their reflections on teamwork, and moving on forward towards engineering alone at the end, which is like doing calculations or performing some engineering activity using a specific tool, and in between the other different codes were doing both, combining in different proportions, writing on engineering and writing about engineering or engineering with notes. And the next one is the Bloom's level of learning, which is also straightforward, which is from remembering to creating. And the last one is the alignment with objectives. The objectives that was stated in the course syllabus, how much are they mapping with a particular problem that is being given as a homework. So, to map that. And all these artifacts are specifically derived by looking at the materials available for 131, but when we move on to bigger, larger, or other collaborative courses with other contexts, it has to be customized on what is available and what can be predicted out of those areas.
So from that coding that we did, we have to do some analysis in order to find trends. So we went through and built a little job application because it's easier to be able to manipulate a little bit. And so the first bit, you can see we have a drop-down box to select any of those categories. Then we can select which years we want to look to and then craft it from there. So here's an example of one of those graphs. So looking at teamwork here, with the 3s were the team tasks, the 1s were the individual tasks, you can see by the time we get to 2014, instead of being a little collective group of team tasks, you can see team tasks are an integral part of the class from beginning to end. They're constantly assigned new work to work within teams, even though they have individual work the whole time through as well. So that might be some interesting findings. It might be saying, hey, we want to have people work in teams more, or we're assigning different ways to teams to be doing that. We also noticed that the tech topics tended to be earlier in the first couple of years, then kind of got spread throughout when MATLAB got integrated, and then kind of came back to early things. So that might show a different way of viewing how those tools are used. And then last thing we can see aligning with the Bloom there, they typically, as you would expect, start with pretty low level of Bloom tasks and then it kind of grows over time. But even in later years, we're asking more of students. We're asking them to do more and do later into the class these more analytical and creative topics that are going on. This is the type of stuff that we're going to be doing further analysis on to see what we can feed back. But this is the tool that we're using for that.
As an example of how these two data sets might be combined in order to produce new meaning, we have the Bloom's levels of learning for the homework on the top and the Bloom's levels of learning for the course objectives on the bottom. Now, we realize that homework does not necessarily make the course, so comparing these two things doesn't necessarily reflect the alignment of the course activities to the course objectives. However, this manner of activity might be useful for people who are developing the course.
So the second step that we are in the process of doing right now is the contributors' feedback. So we are getting in touch with people associated with Engineering 131 course and getting their impressions. So these are a set of impression questions that has been sent out to the contributors, and some of them has responded, and we are waiting to hear from more people. And so this is to just for them to give us an impression about what they think about the 131 course. Once we hear from them, we have personal interviews with them to validate the data that we have collected.
So our next step is obviously the ASW paper that we had talked about, which we're hoping to be able to get on. And a lot of our work is going to be extrapolating out this process. We think Engineering 131 is great. We think the community at large would probably benefit from how do I do this at my school? And that's what we're going to try and put a basis on, put some literature around over the next few weeks. And so we really want to help teams design how do we analyze and design the future steps in our course better. How do we not just vacillate between what we are doing and what's happening here based off of priorities or limited time or different people coming with different opinions? How do we know what we're doing and constantly, through research, do it better? And really try and reinforce the CAT principles we teach here, that we want to align our course objectives. We want our assessments, our homework, our exams to follow along that, and then from there, hopefully teaching the things that align with the rest of this as well. So again, thanks for everybody who's contributed so far. There's a few people here that we've probably hit up before. We'll probably try and find you over the next month to get a little bit more data from you. But we really want to share this data. If you've ever been attached to Engineering 131, this is kind of our pitch to say, hey, we've got interesting data. We'd like to see what you think of that. So we'll definitely find time to be able to talk through some of this stuff as we can. So any questions?
Time for clarification by students.
So the biggest missing piece here is student input. And you have resources to access student data. So you can ask questions, seniors, juniors, which they took these courses. Also, you can cluster course evaluations, 2010, 2014, to see how are they changing related to these changes.
Yeah, definitely the different aspect that we didn't go into was what are the outcomes and what's actually happening to students going through here. At this point, we're just looking at the design. And that would be definitely further research to be able to apply that to grades, apply that to, as you said, all that sort of stuff. And that's certainly a dimension we'd explore in the bigger piece. We're limited by the time we had and what we could do in our 13 weeks, but absolutely it's a fantastic recommendation.
I have a couple questions. On the chart that you showed us where you're comparing the Bloom's level, but I think I missed, but how did you determine what those two labeled as? What was that category?
Yes, we went through every single assignment that each student was asked to do throughout the course of each year. And so, the little detailed dimension, I both coded those. We did our inter-rater reliability and all that sort of stuff. So that's how we got 1 through 6 on the homework.
I guess we both came to, basically both decided, okay, this is apply or this is evaluate.
Exactly. So an MEA would be one level versus the email your TA so they know who you are.
So you looked at the actual course assignment instructions?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we don't know what you as instructors would have said to the students, how that might have altered, but we do have the artifacts that was out there. And so that's what we can kind of present over time. And there's a lot of meta stuff here as well about how easy it was for us to find information. If we're off, perhaps it says something about the way we manage or populate this stuff. And so maybe there is some variance in just the student experience because maybe instructors don't understand it the same, or there's unsaid things or meetings that are missing or things like that. So that's one of the holes, one of our lessons learned is we don't know what we don't know through this.
So and then you also mentioned the alignment between the course learning objectives with the activities and assessments and course work. What process are you using to look at that alignment?
We haven't looked at it extensively yet, but with the codings that we've been able to make, we'll be able to look at areas perhaps just look at the data and see how many assignments fall into the various categories.
Okay, so you will be you'll be like from the outside making judgment, like this assignment appears to be underneath this objective.
Yeah, and what we would recommend is if you looked at that chart and said, wow, we have this many objectives and this many homework assignments, maybe that's something you say is something we want to spend more time on. Or maybe you say, well, this is an objective and the one assignment is really this big. You know, because one of the things we learned is the data doesn't necessarily align for number of assignments versus the weight of assignments. You could get an assignment the third week, which is a 6-week assignment, and that's weighted in the way we represent it the same as something you did in 10 minutes. So you have to be careful of the way you represent data, of course, in anything, but this in particular.
So we'll have time for a couple more questions later if needed, but thanks to these three. We've got a third and final presentation, again moving to the bigger scale. So this is assessment and program scale. Richard Aleong and Nathan Hicks talking about approaches that programs have taken to certain ABET student outcomes.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Nathan and I are really excited to be presenting on our work. For the last 13 weeks, we've been diving into ABET Self-Studies to explore engineering curriculum at a program level. So we've heard at the individual team experiences level, what it's like in the courses. Now we're going to look at program levels using ABET Self-Studies. Our story really begins with understanding ABET Accreditation and where these self-studies, these curriculum documents at the program level come from. ABET is the primary accrediting body for engineering programs in the United States. And this organization has established a set of criteria to ensure quality engineering education. As part of the accreditation process, programs are required to submit a self-study curriculum document, which is about 300 to 500 pages long, that includes 8 criterion sections that cover a wide range of topics about the curriculum, including students and students' characteristics, program educational objectives, student outcomes, and the different facilities and supportive aspects of the institution that will help the program achieve their program goals. Our interest has been in the student outcomes, commonly known as A through K, and we focus on HIJ that focus on the liberal education. So outcome H, as you can see there, is the broad education necessary to understand engineering solutions in the context of society. Outcome I, a recognition and the need for lifelong learning. And outcome J, a knowledge of contemporary issues. Our analysis began with identifying that outcome H and I there are 2 components to this outcome. And this will be important as we present on a little more of the process and our approach and our findings in this research.
So the research question that we chose to address is basically how do engineering programs address these outcomes, H, I, and J? So in order to answer this, we looked at the self-studies, as Richard mentioned. We mined through Google to see what we could find, and we overzealously collected a whole bunch of self-studies. And we decided to kind of narrow down our focus just looking at mechanical engineering programs over the past 7 years. So that's basically one cycle of ABET self-studies. And so we see from those 8 self-studies that we have a pretty good spread as far as the Carnegie classification system in terms of large and smaller universities. And basically the way we went through this data is we did a qualitative content analysis. And so Richard and I both looked through the self-studies. We went through, we coded those self-studies, and then afterwards we would compare and see whether or not we agreed on those, and if we had any sort of discrepancies, we would have a discussion until we came to some sort of consensus. So to further break down the way we refer to address, because that's kind of a vague term, we used, again, the CAP breakdown that Tony's group also used. And from the content, we kind of reinterpreted that as the descriptions that, or the interpretations that the different programs had for each of these outcomes. And then we also looked at the assessment. So in other words, how do they determine whether or not the students are learning these outcomes? Then we looked at the evaluation. So how are they deciding as a program that they are effectively doing this? And then we looked at how are they actually going in and trying to develop these things in their students. So again, to further break this down, we really developed a very systematic approach to coding. First, we had a set of organizational tags, and each one of those organizational tags had 4 different components. So first, we addressed whether or not that piece of information that we were coding related to H, I, or J, and even the subcomponents within H or I. Then we decided whether or not it dealt with the description, the pedagogy, the assessment, or the evaluation. Then whether or not the self-study explicitly said this is connected to outcome I, or whether it was this student outcome is connected to I, and then this thing affects that student outcome. So that would be more connected. And then we noticed sometimes that maybe they were doing it, but they didn't say it, or that we thought there was an opportunity that they could have connected it to it, but they didn't. So we put that also as O. And then we also identified what section in the document it came from. And then we also coded for the content. And so for each of the different dimensions, D, P, A, or E, we wrote that down into a few different factors, and it's different for each one. But for example, for an evaluation, we might look at the instrument, who administered it, who took that instrument, and then what piece of evidence they used to support that. So for an example, we get IEC3, so outcome I, explicit, connected, evaluation connected, came from section 3, and then it's a survey administered by the faculty, taken by the graduate students, and they look at involvement in engineering societies in order to judge lifelong learning. And so basically what this does is this gives us a really strong and large database that we could go through and sort any way that we choose to, looking at different outcomes or different DPAE, whatever we want to look for, we can sort through it and we can find all kinds of information from that.
Great. So here's a visual of the breakdown of data. As Nathan says, we have this database that is coded with these tags and this content across this description, assessment, evaluation, and pedagogy for each outcome within DAE and D. So this is a matrix that shows these 12 spaces that we can conduct levels of analysis on. The first space, the first level analysis is a single dimension analysis where looking specifically at the codes for that one space. So for example here, for outcome I in the description. The second level of analysis is an inter-outcome analysis, looking across one curriculum theme for description, the H, I, and J description. In this analysis, we're looking for the relationships and the connections between one curriculum theme across the outcomes. The third level of analysis is an intra-outcome analysis, so going in depth within the outcome, now looking across the curriculum themes for a specific outcome. And the fourth analysis is a feedback analysis, so looking at how the assessment, evaluation, and pedagogy themes will contribute to our understanding of a program's description of a specific outcome.
So for this presentation, for the sake of time, we're just going to focus on one of those evaluations or assessment or analyses that we could do. And so specifically, we're looking at the descriptions of I. So just a reminder, I is a recognition of a need for or an ability to engage in lifelong learning. And so we found when we looked through these documents that there's 3 pieces that different schools interpret in different ways. First piece is this recognition of the need for. So some programs just so for all of these things, some programs just send it verbatim. So they just copied and pasted and then they went with it from there. Other programs altered it throughout various places throughout the document. Some just removed it entirely, so they said, well, we don't really care about recognizing the need for it, we're just going to focus on that latter part. Other parts kind of went along with this need, necessity kind of basis. And then other ones tweaked it a little bit to look at more of a motivation. So we want our students to be motivated to be lifelong learners, or we want them to have a desire to lay a foundation for lifelong learning. The next part is this ability to. So Again, some people just kept it as, or some schools just kept it as an ability, but then other ones looked at it more as a preparation to be lifelong learners or a commitment to lifelong learning. And the last part is this engagement in lifelong learning. So what does that mean? We basically broke that down into 4 different categories. One of them being related to information literacy, so locating, organizing, evaluating, using multiple sources of data. Continued education, which could be through school, it could be professional education, professional development, skill improvement. General research development, so a lot of times they look at that in their students by seeing undergraduate research or going into a career in research. And then lastly, professionalism, so focusing on being able to effectively work in a workplace or engaging in a profession, in professional societies and things along those lines.
So what we've really tried to emphasize here in this short time is the process and the approach that we've taken to explore all of this data within the curriculum self-studies. With this database, we have the power to search and dive into different ways that programs are thinking about and addressing these HI&J student outcomes. Ultimately, we hope that this kind of data and analysis will encourage critical and creative discussion in engineering educators and among administrators when they're up for planning their accreditation documents and thinking about their program level curriculum design. We use a curriculum framework to ground our analysis in curriculum design principles. And so considering these student outcomes as program curricular priorities, the database will facilitate these discussions around how we can formulate specific and meaningful learning objectives to meet these outcomes. Thank you so much for your time. We'd like to acknowledge our advisor, Dr. Stephen Hoffman, for supervising this project, and Dr. Isabel Jimenez for her support, as well as our fellow ENE explorers.
Any quick questions for this group?
How long that took. I'm thinking of the ability to generalize it across all the ABET outcomes rather than just focusing on those 3. Can you give me a sense for how arduous this was?
I'm glad you brought up that question because it definitely was a long process. Once we had the data collected, I think it took us about 4 to 5 hours per self-study to go through, and then doing the consensus coding after the discussion. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we focus on those 3 outcomes to scope the project.
So to that, how many self-studies did you find when you were searching for them?
I mean, depending on overall?
Yeah, overall.
I think we only collected for civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. And so from that, we have around 30.
And the original plan was to maybe trial 30.
Yes?
So given that you're focusing on HI&J and ABET is going through some moments, what kinds of things do you think you could tell them? Or what are some insights you might be able to tell them in terms of some of the arguments they have, why zip off HI&J into Neverland?
Well, so I don't know if you've seen the most recent thing that's gone around about new proposed changes, but they have kind of reincorporated them back. However, the wording has changed a lot. So for instance, the I has been re-included, but it's really focusing on the information literacy kind of aspect of it. In fact, it's almost verbatim what we found in that other self-study.
One of the other big insights for us that came out of this was seeing how the outcomes were clumped and grouped together. And through the assessment that the assessment may be targeted at one element of that outcome, and then but the rest of the outcome may be missed. And so that's where the breakdown specifically and framing each outcome with these specific elements would be insight for administrators into how can we specifically target that aspect of that outcome, thinking about it as a curricular priority, bigger picture. Yes?